Llangwm, a quiet village in Pembrokeshire where the houses cluster around a few small inlets or pills of the Cleddau River as it winds its way towards the sheltered waters of Milford Haven and the open sea. The name translates from the Welsh as church in a valley, but this is South Pembrokeshire where Vikings, Normans and Flemings have influenced the culture and where the Welsh spelling is inconsistent with the spoken version of the name. Llangwm is pronounced Llangwm by those who live here, and its origins can be traced back for thousands of years, even as far back as Mesolithic times. Long before the formation of the Ria of Milford Haven, this was a fertile valley where bison, deer and ancient cattle roamed. Hunter-gatherers stopped here to sharpen their weapons, and flint tools can still be sometimes found as village fields are ploughed and prepared for next season's crops. As the climate warmed at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose and the valley became flooded, and the landscape we see today was created. Neolithic settlers too left their mark, and the hanging stone, Cromlech, just a mile from the village, remains a testimony to their culture. Suffice to say, this is a village steeped in history, where people have settled to take advantage of the special location on the banks of this river estuary. Graham Stevens was brought up in the village of Llangwm, where he can trace his paternal family back many generations. Today, he's meeting two younger members of the community whose families have arrived more recently. They want to find out more about their village and what life was like here in the past.
Hello there. Now you must be Llangwm and you must be Sunny, is that right?
Yeah.
I'm Graham. Well, welcome to a bit of a dreary and drizzly Llangwm, or more specifically, this is Guildford Pill that we're in at the moment. Now I see you've been doing some research into the village, is that right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Ah, okay, well that's great. So I'm here, hopefully I can answer some of your queries and some of your questions. Were you originally from the village, or have you come into the village from outside?
Well, no. I originally came from Aberystwyth, then moved down to the village 5 years ago.
And you, Llangwm?
I was born in Cardiff and then moved to the village when I was 2.
Okay. Now I understand, am I right in thinking that you attend a Welsh medium school in Haverfordwest?
Yes.
Do you get much chance to practice your Welsh in the village?
Well, not really, actually, because there's not many Welsh speakers in these parts.
Well, there's a very good reason for that. And that's because if we go back into the history of the village, we're right in the heart of South Pembrokeshire here. And South Pembrokeshire, you may have heard, is sometimes called Little England beyond Wales. The history of the area is such that there have been lots of people who've come in here and brought their culture and their language with them. So we've got a bit of a mishmash of things going on. And in fact, some of the words that we use here are from those languages. Take, for example, this area that we're looking at here. This is called the Pill. Now, Pill is a word that really means a creek, but we don't use that word creek in this area. So, and the river that you see running through here, people don't call it the stream really. It's called the lake. And you think, where's the lake? There's no lake here at all. But if we go back in history, the word lake was sometimes used for a small stream or river. And there are lots and lots of other words that we use, part of what we call the dialect. And if you go into that, you'll find lots of odd things. If I picked up a stone now and threw it into the water, I'd be piling the stone. It's a strange word, isn't it? But again, it's been brought into the village from outside. I've brought along some photographs which you might be interested in. It shows the village about 100 years ago, possibly even older than that. And the Pill here is full of small Llangwm boats. These little black 14-foot tarred boats all the way around the Pill as you see it there today. Now there are none there now. In fact, all you see are leisure boats, and there are no fishing boats as such in the Pill. But Llangwm was famous for its fishing. They collected oysters, they collected prawns, they fished for herring, and all sorts of other fish from the river, which would have been taken to market. Ladies from the village would have hawked these all the way across to other towns in Pembrokeshire, even as far as Carmarthen. The second photograph that I've got shows a vessel which is unloading, we think, probably limestone. You can see there's a horse and cart here, and whatever was in the boat is being loaded into the horse and cart. It's possible that we have the wreck of this boat further along the shore. Shall we go and have a look at it? Let's go and have a closer inspection. I don't think we've got too far out. So here we've got the wreck of this vessel. It could be, we're not sure, it could be the same vessel that we saw in the photograph from 100 years ago. But it's quite a big boat, and it's probably getting on for 40 foot long. And here we've got the keel, which runs right the way along here, and back up into the stern post there. And if you look carefully at the stern post, you can actually see a metal rod coming up and a slot in the top where the rudder would have gone. But the ribs of the boat go out as far as here. Look, there's one here and one here, and the same the other side. So it must have been quite a big boat, because it was used probably to carry either limestone or coal. So I think we've seen what we can see from the shore. I think now the best thing that we can do is actually go afloat and take a boat trip along the river and see the village from the perspective of being on the water.
I had a dream on the shores of the Cleddau. Purple and blue were the skies of the Cleddau. We loaded our boats and set off from Llangwm. Passing through time, the sounds, they were many. Sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on. Sail on, sail on, sail my boat. Sail on. We followed the shores to the church.
So we're just approaching the Cleddau Bridge now, and it forms a dividing line really between the industrial part of the haven. If you look behind us, you can see the Valero refinery and power station and the tugs, and alongside in Pembroke Dockyard there where the ferry terminal is. But once we've gone through this, underneath the bridge, it opens out and we're into the estuary then, we're into the Llangwm, which is far less industrialised. I say that, although if we'd been here 100, 150 years ago, industry was much further up on the Llangwm because we had coal mining and we had other industries there as well. Long before the oil industry came to Milford Haven, there was no roadway, no bridging point below Haverfordwest. If you wanted to go from the Nayland side to the Pembroke side, you either had to drive all the way around, which would have been a 30-mile journey, or there was a ferry which operated from the Nayland side there across to Hobbs Point, that slipway that you see over there, and that was the only way across. So the bridge is a vital artery to connect the south of the county with the north of the county. You can see this is part of the Llangwm. Dai meaning two, Cleddau, the river. Cleddau is Welsh for sword, so Llangwm are the two swords. Now where the name came from, I couldn't tell you, but you can imagine that in some ancient Celt coming here and seeing the water sparkling in the morning and thinking, gosh, it's like a sword glinting in the sunshine, isn't it? So Llangwm, two swords. This part of the river here is called Castle Reach, and you can see the reason why, because you've got Benton Castle just lurking in the trees up there, the little white castle, the white turret there. But we're just below Llangwm. The inlet to our right there, where that house, you can see that house, is Llangwm Ferry. Not Llangwm Village, but Llangwm Ferry. But interesting, this building across here, that you can see on the shoreline here, is called the Chemicals. That's not its name today. I think it's used, it's somewhere for tourists to stay at the moment. But originally,
it was used for manufacturing chemicals, particularly naphtha, and that was used in the coal mines further upriver at Hook and Land Shipping. So it's retained the name chemicals to everybody who lives in the area. I believe it's named now as a tourist area is shipwrights. That's interesting though, because before it became the chemicals, it was a shipbuilding yard. Ships were built all the way along the Haven before Milford Docks were built or before Pembroke Dock came along. You would have had small shipbuilding yards dotted all the way up the Haven, and this was one of those shipbuilding yards. And there's a record of at least 5 or 6 ships that were down here, schooners that plied the coast around South Wales, and they were actually built here. But it's now, everyone knows it as the chemicals.
Sailor indeed.
Where are we now on the river then?
Well, if you look at the chart, we can see that we're actually still on the main Gleddau section of the estuary, which runs past here. But to our right-hand side, there is another river system that flows into this part, and we've got the Carew River and the Creswell River, which come down past this area here, which is Llangwm.
Is that a key over there?
Yeah, that's right. It's Llangwm Quay, and it was built when boats coming down from further upstream were carrying coal. Barges would unload their coal there to go on to even larger vessels to actually be taken out from the Haven and taken all over the UK. Today, of course, the quayside is not used for anything industrial like that, but it's the centre of a boating industry. This is a leisure industry that's grown up, and you can see all the boats that are moored off there and the pontoon that comes out. So it's tourism now that has taken over as the main industry, and not coal and exporting coal from here. So on the left-hand side, we've got Benton Castle. You can see it there above the waterway, looking down over the waterway.
Do you know why it was built there then?
Yeah, if you look closely, you can see there's an outcrop of rocks that stretch out into the river here. They're actually called the Castle Rocks, and Benton is built on this rocky outcrop. Now the rock type is called rhyolite, which is an ancient volcanic rock. It was actually thrown out millions of years ago by a volcano, and so it's very hard, and Benton is perched on top of that rock outcrop that's there.
Who built it?
Well, it was built back in the late 1200s by a Bishop Beck. Now, Bishop Beck was Bishop of St David's, but he also had a brother who was Bishop of Durham. So I think they must have been a very well-to-do religious family. It was then occupied in the 1300s by Thomas de la Roche. Now, the de la Roche family has got very close associations with Llangwm. In fact, Thomas de la Roche had a title Lord of Llangwm. So he occupied it then. We don't have much information of it after that, and we think it then fell into ruin. It stayed in a ruinous state right the way through until the 1950s, when a Dr. Pegg took it on board and started to renovate the castle. And today it's occupied by someone else, and they have continued to improve it, and to be honest, it's quite spectacular. The other thing to note about Llangwm Quay was that during the Second World War, it was a flying boat base, and they actually had flying boats, 15 supermarine walruses and another dozen or so Sikorsky Kingfisher boats, or say boats, seaplanes, that operated from there and used this stretch of water that you see here, and you can see it's a nice clear stretch of water, to take off and land.
John Evans is a founder member of the Sunderland Trust and an expert in World War II flying boats based in Pembrokeshire.
In World War II, it was known as Royal Naval Air Station Llangwm Ferry, and it was where they operated seaplanes and float planes for a very important role for the Royal Navy and operating aircraft of capital ships. Now, the Royal Navy had battleships and cruisers, and they had seaplanes on board which acted as spotters. They used to fly the seaplanes off to be sort of eyes in the sky. Now, this required a lot of training, And places like Llanwm Ferry were chosen, which were quiet and secluded waters. And that's why Llanwm Ferry, for a short period of time, just really 2 active years in the middle of the Second World War, became very important to the Royal Navy. Well, I think anybody living around the Cleddau at that time would have remembered the noise of the Walrus, which was somewhat like a World War I biplane. It was so antiquated looking, but it was a very, very important and very practical aircraft. It was a biplane, so it had 2 wings, and it had an engine which was a pusher engine, very raucous, very noisy, and that was the one that was principally at Llanwm Ferry for the duration. But also then a more modern looking aircraft, which was called the Kingfisher, which is an American aircraft, had a single float and 2 outriggers, and that was brought in towards the end of Llanwm Ferry's period of active service, which ended basically at the end of 1943. I know from my own family connections that my mother was a land girl at Picton, at the Ross area during the war, and she remembers seeing and hearing the walruses landing and taking off Picton Point. Of course, any wide open space of water in the upper reaches of Cleddau was important for these operations, and an area like off Picton Point, very wide there where the 2 rivers meet, where that would have been a place that you would have had bombing exercises as well as takeoffs and landings as well. You know, dropping down onto the water, taking off noisily again. A sight to behold, really.
So we've now reached the upper end of Castle Reach, and all this area here has been given individual names by the fishermen from Llangwm who came down here. The area just up here is called Gully Draft. Now, I don't know where the name has come from, but gully, obviously it's very deep here, and it's got a deep draft, but whether that's the origins of the name, I couldn't say. But if we look on this map here, all these numbers that we've got going down the map are actually the names of different places along here. We've got names like the Coaches, Kitestone, Llanwm Cockshut, Tommy Thomas's, the Withies, Dun Cow, the Hole, Red Slop. Every little promontory and every little bay along here was given an individual name, so that people from the village would be able to identify to within 100 yards exactly which place it was. Now, it's very important for fishing in this particular part of the river.
What sort of fish do they fish for here?
It was herring, because during the springtime the herring come up the haven and shoal in order to spawn, and so at that time of the year the fishermen would come down and shoot their nets across the river here at 90 degrees to the far shore, and in several lines of nets, you know, there could be up to 20, maybe even more boats that would all shoot their lines or shoot their nets across there, and then over the low water period, when the tide would slack, the fish would get caught in the nets, and then they would haul them in and then go back up to the village with their boats absolutely brimmed full of herring.
We loaded our boats and set off from Llangwm, passing through time, the sounds they were many. Sail on, sail my boat, sail on, sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on.
So at last we've reached our home village of Llangwm, and we're just offshore of Llangwm Ferry. If you look at the chart, we're about here and we're looking in that direction at the ferry.
Was there a ferry service here?
There used to be many years ago. In fact, it was a really important ferry service because, as we've said before, there was no bridge to get across the haven, so anybody who wanted to cross from that side to that side required a ferry.
So who used the ferry then?
Well, lots of people would have used the ferry, particularly the fisherwomen of Llangwm, who would have used it because the fisherwomen who sold prawns and oysters, and they took their produce to market in Pembroke, in Tenby, and as far away as Carmarthen. So you can imagine to walk all the way around the estuary would have been really difficult. Now the ferry ran from over there on the foreshore there at what's called the Ferry Bay, and it ran across the waterway to a pub that was on the opposite side. In fact, where that white house is there used to be a pub called the Square and Compass, and the person who ran the Square and Compass also ran the ferry service. But the ferry boat fell into disrepair, and as a consequence it stopped running. So a rival ferry boat set up on the opposite shore, on the Llangwm shore, and that was run by the Reverend Phillips from the Williamston estate. So we've got two of the lords of the manor, the Owens family on one side and the Phillips family on the other. And the Owens family were absolutely irate that a ferry service had set up from the other side, from the Llangwm side. And they took it to court, and it went all the way to Gray's Inn in London. Eventually, I think it was settled, but it seems that both ferry services operated. Both boats on both sides of the haven were operating.
Have the houses on the shore always been there?
Well, the oldest ones, over in the corner there, they're probably 200-300 years old at least. But a lot of the other houses are relatively new. But originally, they would have been what we call clom cottages, right on the shoreline, and these belonged to the fishermen and fisherwomen who lived in Llangwm, and they operated from those. They were very, very basic. They had thatched roofs, they had earth floors, and they were made out of what we call clom, which is basically a very loose stone cemented together with lime mortar. So really, really very simple houses. But those would have been all the way dotted along and into the Pill in Llangwm, and that was where the fishermen of the village would have lived, obviously with their boats directly in front of their houses. If you look on the shore over here, this promontory of rock here is called the Vittlin. Now it gets its name from victualling, supplying food and drink, because back in the early 19th century, probably late 17th century, Milford Haven was a port where the Royal Navy came in, and they were always looking for sailors. So some of the people from those ships would roam the countryside looking for likely sailors and actually kidnap them, if you like, and take them on board. They were called press gangs because they actually impressed the men into service for the king. So to avoid the press gangs, the men of this village, if they got warning of it, they would hide. And they would hide in caves which are further along the shoreline here. Up in those woods there are some caves. And it is said that they hid in those caves, and at night the women of the village would bring food and drink and leave it on the Vittlin rock. And so at the dead of night the men would come out and take the food and go back into hiding. And then when the ships had departed from Milford and the press gangs weren't around anymore, they could go back to their normal lives. Now if we follow the estuary up the river, a little bit further on it splits into the two Cleddau rivers, the Western Cleddau and the Eastern Cleddau. The Western Cleddau leads to Haverfordwest, and at one time Haverfordwest was a very important port. So there would have been lots of trading vessels back and forth here, coming from all over Britain, but also from the continent.
Well, for many centuries, Haverfordwest was a key port, in fact, one of the largest ports in the whole of Wales. In the Middle Ages, it had a thriving commerce, trading with Bristol, London, Ireland, and in fact across all other ports on the west coast of England and Wales. And it was a very prosperous town. The name of Quay Street, in fact Quay Street in Haverfordwest, was first known as Ship Street in 1370. Later the name was changed to Quay Street, and it was known as Quay Street by 1564. And there were many, many vessels based there. And in fact, the port of Haverfordwest was vibrant up until the mid-1930s, when the last of the large sailing vessels quit the port for the final time. And when you think you're standing here now at Black Tar, it's incredible to think that this was a major international highway. There were no roads, there was no railway, there was no air travel. The river, the seas were the international highways. And so you're standing here on the Pembrokeshire beach, and it really does require an enormous leap of imagination. But it's true that you would have seen in 1394, you would have seen Richard II with his entire court, all the great nobles and earls and barons of England sailing down this river to Ireland in 1394. You would have seen many of the English kings, like King John, would have come up and down to Haverfordwest. So this river may seem and present a quiet appearance now, but in its time it's seen some incredibly important historic events. Smuggling is probably as old as human commerce itself, but the real golden age of smuggling, as it's called, was the 18th and 19th centuries. In fighting the wars against revolutionary France and Napoleon, Britain spent £830 million. Now that's a large sum of money, especially when you think that the annual expenditure of government in a peacetime year was only £18 million. So the government had to get money by imposing indirect taxation on almost anything you could think of. There was tea, brandy, wine, silks, everything you could imagine was taxed. Smuggling has been endemic, and especially in places like Pembrokeshire, where there was no police force, government was very remote concept in Westminster, and so all the ports and the creeks of Pembrokeshire were absolutely a godsend for the smugglers.
In this area, or just up from here, there would have been salmon fishing using compass nets, a very specialised type of fishing, brought into the area by two people by the name of Ormond and Edwards, who actually practiced this sort of fishing up in the Severn Estuary. But they were miners, and they transferred from the Forest of Dean, where there were coal mines, down to Hook, and they brought with it their technique in fishing. So salmon fishing, yes. But before that, oysters were really, really important in this part of the world. And Llangwm was famed for its oysters. So much so that the oysters were actually pickled in vinegar and put in barrels, and ships used to come in and land at Llangwm, dry out, and the oysters in the barrels would have been taken on board the ships and then taken off as far afield as Bristol or London. This is land shipping. Now, land shipping is on a coal seam, a special coal seam. It's called anthracite, very hard, black, shiny coal. And the coal seam runs from Amroth in the south of the county all the way through to Knowlton.
Dr. Robert Llywelyn Davies has spent many years researching local history in and around land shipping, particularly with regard to coal mining.
The seam itself starts over at Amroth, and it's an enormous seam that stretches literally through Amroth, through Loverston, it comes through Jeffferston, right across, it comes through land shipping, and then across the river here and over towards Hook on the other side, where the seam more or less runs out. Even today, there are hundreds of thousands of tons of anthracite still left in the seam. The trade was very important to Pembrokeshire, and this was one of the largest coal mines in the Pembrokeshire area, known as the land shipping and anthracite and coal mine. 150 years ago, as such, it wouldn't have looked a lot different to what it does today. The only difference was there was about 1,000 people living in this particular village, which to some extent was the hub of the land shipping colliery, because all the mines within the colliery, of which there would have been probably 6 to 8 mines functioning 150 years ago all had to bring their anthracite along a trackway, a tramway, along this bridge, and this bridge, which was built in 1801 for that very purpose of exporting the coal, it would have gone out on a rail that went to a point in the river where the barges came and took the coal away from all of the mines in the area. The whole of this area is literally riddled with coal mines. Some of them have now been blocked off. Some of them have even opened up in fairly recent years, and tractors have disappeared down them. Underneath the river here is a labyrinth of literally dozens of channels, more or less like fingers, that are spread out under the river. And they also came right inland. So when the river flooded, of course, it would have affected everything that went on. And if we look across at the side here, we can still see the remnants of the original quay that would have gone out about twice the distance that it does today, where the boats would have come up, the barges would have come up river, loaded with the anthracite, and then gone back down river to larger boats at Pembroke Dock. There were several quite significant disasters. Perhaps the biggest disaster, which was the largest disaster of its kind anywhere in Pembrokeshire, where 40 miners lost their lives. It occurred at 3:30 in the afternoon of February the 14th, 1844. The tide was on full flood, so it meant the river was literally up to the brim. And at one point the river broke through just across the headland here, and the people working on the shore could hear this terrific rumbling sound, and they realised something was seriously wrong. 58 miners were in the drift at the time, of which 18 scrambled out of the drift. 40 were trapped the wrong side of it. The river broke through, and with that the force was so great, and the volume of water, it was running at something like in 7 seconds the river had risen by a foot. So within a minute all the drifts were flooded, and sadly all the miners in there died as a result of the flooding. The memorial here was part of the Millennium Project. We wrote a book about land shipping, and of course the disaster featured significantly in it. And when we were asked to design this memorial, a group of us got together and decided that we needed something that expressed what the mine disaster was about. So what we have here, this is really the channel of the coal mine and the shaft going down, and this represents the garden pit shaft, and these here represents the drifts coming off it. So this would have gone under the river, this one would have come along the river and perhaps inland. And you can imagine when the river broke through, so it broke through up here, it flooded this area and flooded all of the drifts, and the mine was completely lost. And then when we look at the names, and we've got all these names below, we see sort of names like Joseph Hart, just 4 years of age, his dad 31, John Butland, age just 17. We see Thomas Butland, his brother, aged just 10. We see families of the Cole family, all lost. The Picton family, varying in age from 40 from the dad, and then the brothers Joseph and Mark Picton, all lost in the disaster. Fortunately, all remembered on this lovely memorial.
The Llangwm of today is a thriving village community. Like the rest of Pembrokeshire, the village is popular with visitors who, along with its inhabitants, take advantage of its idyllic river location. Fishing is now more for pleasure rather than as a livelihood, and you are more likely to see sailing yachts and canoes than herring craft and salmon boats. There is still evidence of the Llangwm of earlier days, notably in its narrow roads and older buildings. But this 21st century settlement, with its new arrivals and its vibrant culture, remains at the heart of Pembrokeshire life.
I had a dream on the shores of the Cleddau. Purple and blue were the skies of the Cleddau. We loaded our boats and set off from Llangwm. Passing through town, the sounds they were many. Sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on, sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on. We followed the shores of the church in the valley. Clusters of houses and inlets and alleys, surrounding my fields that never would run dry. Settled again by the shores of the Cleddau. Sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on, sail on, sail on, sail my boat, sail on. They've spotted the bones of an old and tight sailing ship, stuck in the mud, sailing its last trip. Sail on, sail